This is your fault, Joe.
What did I do now?
I bought another fountain pen.
Ooh. That makes me really happy.
My wife is angry at you.
That's okay. I don't talk to her as much as I talk to you.
True.
All right, what did you get? All the details.
All right. I got a TWSBI Diamond 580 and an ink set from TWSBI that I heard recommended on the Pen Addicts gift guide. I should have known when I started listening to that I was going to buy something. And so the TWSBI 580 is a piston filler fountain pen. It's the first one I've had where you like suction up the ink after you dip it in the bottle. And I like it a lot. It's really nice. It's my first fine nib. I've got a medium nib, which is a Schaefer 300, which I liked, but the fine nib is definitely for me.
Yeah.
And I got, like I said, 6 different inks in this ink set, a couple different greens. There's a blue, there's a pink, I think, a purple, and an orange. I'm using the orange right now, and it looks awesome in my Baron Fig Confidant notebook.
This makes me happy on so many levels. It's a little disturbing. That is like my favorite pen.
Yeah,
that I own is the TWSBI Diamond 580. Like that's my thing. I like the 580 a lot, and I use a fine nib in it too. So I think we have the identical pen. It makes me happy.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Only had it a day. It came actually while I was traveling. So this is the first day that I've used it, but inking it up, I believe that's the term all the cool kids use.
Yep.
Was really fun. And it feels really nice when I use it. I really like the fine nib. It really feels a lot better than the medium nib did and far less feathering. So yeah, this is the pen for me, at least until I find something else new and shiny.
Can I make things more difficult for you?
Oh boy. Sure. Go ahead.
They make an inkwell specifically for these pens because you can unscrew the nib section and then it clicks onto the top, and the inkwell has a little tube that reaches down towards the bottom of the inkwell, and when you use the piston filler, it just sucks it up through that right into the pen. So you don't actually have to dip the nib into the ink itself at all.
Oh, wow.
Which
is
addictive. I purchased this thing using gift card money a couple years ago, 3 years ago, I forget now. And I love it, but it's like $40 for the inkwell. So I'm going to just stick that pin in the back of your mind and see how long it takes you to buy it.
Will Mike buy it before next episode? Tune in and find out.
So yes, there you go. I'm proud of you, Mike. You've stepped into the true analog world. I'm very happy for you.
Full analog nerddom achieved.
Totally.
All right, we've got some other follow-up here from last episode.
Yes.
Did you do your 2-minute morning practice?
Sometimes, yes. Not entirely, but sometimes. So I need to keep working on this one. I like having it there. The concept being just answering a few questions about my day and how things I'm grateful for and things I'm planning to do for the day ahead. So like those are the things that I'm working towards implementing in my morning routine. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I don't get it done. I know that when it happens, I'm more effective throughout the day. So, there's that. I should do it more. Thus, it's going to stay on the list, Mike.
All right. So we're checking in on it next time. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that would be a fair thing to do.
Okay.
How about you?
I've got 3 action items from last time, which a lot of them are impossible to mark as completed via action. So typical for me.
Yep. I think you do this on purpose.
Maybe. Although the action items from this book aren't any better. The first one was to answer the question, who can I mentally release to? And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that I maybe don't need anyone. And that sounds a little bit weird saying it, but let me clarify that. Someone had mentioned to me, and I apologize, I can't remember who said it specifically, but they said, basically, that's what journaling is for me. I'm able to write those things down, and it's like getting them out and confessing them to somebody. And I realized that between that and the prayer habit that I have firmly established as part of my morning routine, I really should just quit whining about how I don't have anybody and just start doing this.
Yes.
So, lesson learned. I've also got one for sharing my failures. I have passed this one with flying colors. I just recorded an episode of Focused and shared all about all the things that I have failed at this year.
All right.
And that was inspired by this action item. It's episode 88, and we're really talking about like the last year, because we started Focused at the beginning of the year. So January basically was when we changed it from Free Agents to Focused. So we've been talking about Focus for about a year. We're kind of reflecting on that, picking a word for the year, which is something that we did. I traveled to Kansas City this last week and spent some time with the Blanc media team, and we all went out to dinner, and Sean asked everybody, okay, what was your last year summarized in a single word? And I was like, oh man. And the one I landed on was reset, and you can listen to Focused if you want all the gory details. But that really got me thinking about this topic more in depth, more detail, and that coupled with this action item, I was looking for an opportunity to share that type of stuff. And so I have done that. And I've also done this a couple of times, just talking to people face to face. So I don't have like a record of those conversations, but I have done a better job of sharing the things that I have not done well in the last year. And it's actually been really freeing, which is kind of the point in this action item from the last episode, You Are Awesome. So I would say that this one I can mark as complete, but it's not something I want to be done with. I want to continue to do this.
I think that this is something that is super helpful for anybody to do, but it's really hard to bring yourself to the point where you will do it.
Yes.
Like this is something that like I've tried to follow this path and go down this path a lot in recent years. And I feel like, you and I have been pretty frank with each other and on the show as well, but it's very different whenever you're intentional about using, at least in my case, the way I do it is I use my failures in order to tell a story for someone else so that they can learn from what I did wrong.
Yep.
Like that's a lot of what I end up doing. So I assume you're doing something similar, but I have found it to be extremely freeing doing that as well.
Yeah. Honestly, sometimes people will approach me and they'll say, this happened just the other day in my mastermind group. It was like, I look at everything I got done, and then I look at you, Mike, and I'm like, that's a whole nother level. And I like immediately was like, well, I'm not so hot. I failed at this, that, and the other thing. And I had to let this go and stop doing this because I just couldn't handle it. And the standard response when I share that type of stuff is like, oh, wow, I had no idea, which is kind of the point, I guess, is that people tend to project everything that's going right. It's not really what's going on. And then you try to hold yourself to this impossible standard set by these other people that you're watching. And I don't want to contribute to anybody else not feeling good about what they're able to do, because the truth is that I struggle with this stuff and make mistakes just like everybody else does. The important thing is the perspective and the adjustments that you make as you keep going back to the growth mindset thing. If there was a drinking game for Bookworm, it would be growth mindset related.
I like it. Well, I commend you on continuing down this process. Yes. Flow, Mahali, growth mindset. Always think about getting better. There you go. We just summed up 82 episodes of Bookworm.
Last action item I had was to implement Untouchable Days ? That's because I'm not going to do this immediately. But as I mentioned in the last episode, I feel like I've kind of been doing this already, and I'm going to continue to look for opportunities to do this because the work culture at Blanc Media is so awesome. That was a big takeaway, which we'll get into that as we get into today's book. But I recognize that I am just totally in love with this 8-week cycle thing and forced sabbaticals and things being chill and using Basecamp and not expecting an immediate response. Like, if you get the right people on the team, this is definitely the way to work.
All right. I am on board with you. I just wish I could do that more.
Well, I guess let's just jump into today's book then, because that's a perfect segue. So today's book is Margin by Richard Swenson, which I first heard about and read when Sean Blanc talked about it several years ago. And since then, he has released a course called the Margin Course, which is pretty awesome. I've gone through that course. I work with the Blanc Media team, so I didn't help build that one. That one was in development before I joined the team, but it's kind of what you would expect from Blanc Media. It's the same sort of format as the focus course, but the entire focus is on margin in the different areas that you need it, which we'll jump into in a little bit. So I've read this book before. I liked it when I first read it. Then there was the Margin Course, which I have gone through. And then I read this book again. And I have to say that reading it the second time, it impacted me a lot greater than it did the first time that I read it. If I were to sum it up, I would say the first time I read it, I'm like, oh, that sounds nice, but this guy's probably just making a bigger deal about this. For where I am right now and what I've gone through in the last year, I read this and I was like, oh man, I should have listened to this the first time.
Yep, for sure. I went through this and thought, this is perfect timing. I really needed this. And a case in point, I told Mike this before we started recording. This is the first time I'll be recording this episode without book in hand. And I just sit, we're talking about failures. I am certain I brought the thing home from church. I come home early on Fridays and we record this. And I set it down somewhere and I cannot find it. And if I had given myself the time between things, I would have had plenty of time to go back to the church, see if I left it there, come home. Like, I could have done that, but I didn't give myself enough buffer, enough margin to do that. And that meant that I was hustling around for 20 minutes trying to find this book. I still couldn't find it. So thankfully, I have a handful of notes on my phone from going through it that I wanted to talk about for Bookworm, which I didn't know when we started recording, Mike. I was looking while you were talking, and I'm going to be going off of that. But this is, again, case in point. If I had been building in margin where I should be, I would not have had to hustle and rush and start this whole episode with a little bit of stress on the back of my mind. So this is good timing. Thanks for picking this, Mike. I owe you.
Thanks to the Bookworm Club for picking this, because it had lots of votes. So, but yeah, this is the right thing at the right time for me too. As I read through this, and end of the year, as we're recording this, was reflecting on the last year. A lot of things became pretty clear to me, which we'll get into as we dive into the specifics of this book. The book is broken down into really 4 different sections, officially 3. The first chapter is called Marginless Living. That's where we'll start. This first chapter really just talks about the state of the society or the culture right now, and how we have all of this affluence. We're really prosperous. And so he asks the question, if we're so prosperous, why are we so stressed? And he makes the point that pain and the absence of margin are related. And pain isn't necessarily a bad thing because it causes us to focus. The next whole section of the book is part 1, the problem, pain, and then it goes into part 2, the prescription, margin, and then it ends with part 3, the prognosis, health. I think for today, we'll focus kind of specifically on the 3 different parts, and we're not going to go through all the different chapters in here, but we'll kind of call out the things that are important and talk about some of the main points, unless you had anything you wanted to talk about as it pertains to the marginless living section, Joe, but that's kind of like the introduction.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything specific other than I live it, so there's that. All
right, cool. Well, then we'll jump into part 1, the problem, pain. And one of the things that stood out to me in this section was his definition of progress. Progress is proceeding to a higher level of development, but he makes the observation that progress always gives more. Progress is never associated with less. And there are some charts in the appendix of this book for different areas. And when you look at them, they're kind of like the hockey stick type curve where we've gone along for a little while and then all of a sudden the last 10 years like ramps way up. And then when you combine all of those together, it kind of has an exponential effect. And the bottom line is that we have more of everything than we've ever had before. And there's a quote, let me find this, by Peter Drucker. This is not actually in the book, but when I saw this, it really impacted me and I thought it summarized perfectly what he's talking about in this section. Because Peter Drucker is the big management guy. He said at one point that in a few hundred years, when the history of our time will be written from a long-term perspective, it's likely that the most important event historians will see is not technology, not the internet, not e-commerce. It is an unprecedented change in the human condition. For the first time, literally, substantial and rapidly growing numbers of people have choices. For the first time, they will have to manage themselves, and society is totally unprepared for it. So when I read that and then thought about everything that Richard Swenson says in Margin, I'm like, yeah, he was totally right. And Richard Swenson's kind of talking about the current state of things in this first section here on the problem of pain.
So I kind of struggled with this part, Mike, and I understand it's his entire premise here, but he explains how progress just almost by definition means adding things. This is my summarization.
Yep.
In that you're continually contributing more to what you're doing in life and what you're willing to take on. You know, as we progress and we have smartphones, well, it didn't mean that we stopped communicating. It just changed the way we communicated. And by proxy, we almost could say we communicate a lot more than we ever have, just in a different way. And that's not necessarily allowing us to subtract in some form, which means we're constantly putting addition to the equation and putting more into our lives. So again, not by definition progress equals addition, but it is something he kind of goes to. And the reason I somewhat struggled with it is because I like progress.
Sure.
And so like, okay, I really enjoy that, you know, technology continues to grow and advance and we continue to get better at things. He wouldn't argue with that. He was very careful to say this is not a, we should go back to the way things were type book. That's not his point. His point is that if we're going to continue to accelerate progress, we have to be aware of what it's doing. Like, this is more of an awareness thing than anything. So I could definitely appreciate that, but I do still like progress.
Yeah, and I think the main point here is not that progress is bad. He's careful to call that out. He says progress is not evil, but to be intentional about the areas that we want to apply progress in, because more for the sake of more is not necessarily a good thing. In the second chapter, The Pain of Progress, he talks about the 5 different environments, and he mentions that most of our progress has come from advances in the physical environment and the cognitive environment, but most of our pain is felt in the social, emotional, and spiritual environments. And that is where a lack of margin can really show up. Actually, let me redefine that. I think that's kind of where the absence of margin is experienced first. And then if you don't deal with some of the symptoms as they become evident in those areas, which is kind of why he's calling this out, then eventually they will cause you to completely break down and the physical and cognitive environments are going to be impacted as well. There's kind of 2 basic principles that he outlines in the book. 1, that man has limited capacity, and 2, that overloading the system leads to serious breakdown in performance. You can't just rev your engine all the time. You've got to rest eventually, but a lot of us think, "Oh, I got this. I'll just push through this thing." I'm so guilty of this. I do that all the time. I'll just get to this point and then things will be better. But they're not better because the systems that have contributed to this haven't been addressed. And I haven't built in or prioritized margin into how I plan my day, my week, my year, how I manage myself and my family. And it's a systemic problem. It's not the result of something that went wrong, although there's a lot of value in simplicity too. We'll get to that in a little bit. I just think that he does a great job of pointing out that we neglect certain areas, we experience pain in those certain areas, and then we dismiss it because we see all these gains in these other areas. But those gains are temporary unless we recognize what's really going on.
Absolutely. And I can say, because I live this lifestyle without margin, it is very painful. Can I just stop there? I feel like I have to keep saying I screw this up.
Share your failures.
Do that a lot today.
Yeah. The thing about stress, though, I want to call out here because he does talk about this in chapter 4. Stress can be positive or negative. And he's a medical doctor, so he has a lot of great explanations for these different things. Positive stress is called eustress, which makes us especially creative before a deadline. We probably all experienced this and thought to ourselves, well, see, stress isn't bad. But then there's negative stress also, and that's distress. That's the systemic kind of stress where if you're constantly under stress, you're constantly under load, then eventually something is gonna break. There's a whole bunch of effects from these stress disorders. Again, he's a medical doctor, so he breaks them down into psychological, physical, and behavioral. I'm not going to go into all of these, but it's pretty serious. Everything from depression to anxiety to forgetfulness to headaches to insomnia. It's pretty crazy to see all of the things that lack of margin can lead to. And I don't know about you, but when I read that list, I'm like, oh yeah, that's been me. Check.
Yeah, it was almost like a checklist of here's all the things I've screwed up. Yep, that one and that one and that one. And to be honest, the thing that because he talks about knowing your limits, when it comes to how much can you lift, you pretty much know your limit. But when it comes to how many people can you help through a difficult situation, there is an emotional limit there, but we don't really think of it that way.
Yep.
We don't think about, if you have a friend who's going through a difficult time, maybe they found out they have cancer or something. That's traumatic for both them and you to help them through that. But multiply that by 100 friends who have a similar scenario. You can't do that. That's an easy one. It's no, I cannot help 100 friends. I wish I could. And I would likely try, but I'm going to destroy myself in the process in order to do that. So there is an emotional limit there, but we don't really think about that. At least I hadn't really thought about it that way. So whenever he spelled all this out, okay, yeah, understanding limits. When you go over those limits, it's when you're overloaded and the stress starts to kick in. Yes, there can be good stress. I get that. Makes perfect sense, but it still means you have to be aware of it. And know when you're over those limits, because it's okay to go over those limits as long as you know it and are willing to get back off of it. That was at least the takeaway I had from that.
Yeah, a lot of this comes just from recognition of the current state of things. But the thing is that he makes the point, we've lived so long without margin that we kind of don't even know what to look for a lot of times. We just assume that this is the way things are, because we don't even know what margin is. We don't realize when it's gone. And again, stress isn't necessarily bad. One of the things that jumped out to me as I was reading this section, I was thinking about Flow by Mihaly and how we need to have a certain amount of stress in order to really feel fulfilled. And I totally believe that, but I also think there are a lot of things that can compound that stress that we voluntarily put ourselves in harm's way, and then when they all add up together, it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Some of the factors that he talks about in here that can contribute to stress are change, mobility, expectations, time pressure, work, control, fear, relationships, competition, frustration, anger. And if you don't pay attention to any of those things, it's very easy to, again, view that as a checklist. And yep, got that one, got that one, got that one. And then you realize that, well, yeah, I guess kind of the reason I feel the way that I do is that all of these things are working against me. And even that can become normalized. So as I've been thinking about this, have been comparing where I'm at now with where I was at the beginning of the year. And I've recognized now that at the beginning of the year, I was not in a very good place. At the time, I felt I was fine. But when I compare it to the current state of things, I realize that the way things are right now is actually a whole lot better than they were. And it makes me very thankful for the situation that I'm in, the margin that I have created. And then also it makes me want to never go back to that, because I realize once I get some distance from that, how awful that was. And I hesitate sharing this, we're share my failures. So I'm going to talk about this, but I feel a little bit of, well, I'm sharing this stuff, but it's really nothing compared to people who have like clinical depression or are dealing with suicidal thoughts or things like that, because I never had it to that degree. So who am I to complain about stuff? But you got to recognize this stuff too. You can't just smile and say everything is fine. Like the meme with the dog and the house is on fire. That's, looking back, I kind of realized that that's kind of what I was trying to do at the beginning of the year. And fortunately, some things played out and my situation changed. I'm able to look back at it now and realize how far I have come. And not to say that I've arrived, not to say that I've figured everything out. I probably still have a lot of ground to take, but this feels way better. And as I'm reading margin, again, this is kind of like, now I feel for the first time, I am able to breathe. I am able to relax. I'm able to let my guard down. And that's what margin does.
Well, I'm very grateful for where you are now. For sure. One thing I want to point out about this book, because I did not know this going in, and I think that's just because I didn't really look into this book a whole lot, but this is definitely a Christian book.
Yes.
I don't think that anywhere near detracts for us, of course. For some, I think it might. At the beginning of this, he doesn't talk about God and Christ and the Bible early on in this, not much anyway. But when as he goes through the book, it becomes, I don't want to say a focal point, but it's a strong theme that runs through it later on in the book, which personally I really enjoyed, because it's kind of a breath of fresh air from what I feel like I normally do with some books where I'm like trying to translate the evolution talk and such. This is not that. This is just a straight up, you don't have to really translate it if you're a Christian at all. So definitely a breath of fresh air for me. But I did want to point that out. I feel like that's an important thing to bring up for some.
Yes, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was asked just the other day by somebody, should I recommend The Second Mountain by David Brooks to somebody who would typically be put off by talk about faith? And I said, that book, no problem. Like, he talks about some of his personal beliefs, but it really doesn't color any of the points that he makes in that book. It's part of his personal story. That is not the case with this book. As I was thinking about that, I'm like, well, yeah, you could recommend The Second Mountain. Definitely don't recommend margin to that person.
Yes.
And actually,
sure.
To be fair, the first two sections, there's not a whole lot of that. And honestly, that's where the majority of the value from this book comes for me, is talking about the pain that comes from a lack of margin. And then part two is the prescription. That's where he talks about creating margin in different areas. It's not till the third section, the prognosis, where I think this is the weakest section in the whole book anyways, but that's really where he gets into a lot of the spiritual stuff and his own, like a lot of his lists of things, like 3 points, 4 points, whatever. You'll see a lot of that stuff in there. So if you're put off by that, then I would say just read the first two sections of this book, but there's still value in it for anybody.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point, because at the end of part one, and this is when he first brings it up, in that God did not call us to a life of hectic overload. Like that's when he brings it up. And that's where like that theme starts to run. It's like, this is not what was intended for you. And to be honest, like that's a bit of an alarm bell for me, partially because some of the marginless living that I have is as a result of my job, which is working for the church.
Sure.
So that's something I'm going to have to wrestle with, and I don't really know what to do with that. It's one of those things like people expect you to be there during working hours, but a lot of the events are after hours. So what do you do with that? Like, do I just not do the extra events? Do I do some? Do I not work some day? Like, what does that mean? Like, what does margin mean in that scenario? I don't have an answer to that because I feel like I need to be doing both, and the pressure is to do both. But my wife obviously doesn't want me to do both, and I would agree with her that I should not do both. So I haven't quite figured out what the solution there is. I don't have an action item on this because I don't really know what I would write other than just think about it. But trying to figure out how to simplify that and nail it down to where it's more accurate. I don't really know what that means quite yet, but it is something I need to explore because given the biblical background of this book, it definitely made me stop and think it through a little bit from a different angle.
Sure. Well, I definitely have thoughts on that, and it does pertain to this book, but we should probably have that conversation off air.
All right, we can do that.
For the sake of the listeners.
Drafts, here I come. For Mike to tell me.
The point, which is general, which could apply to your situation and everybody else, I think, is not that you shouldn't be doing certain things, but to make sure that you're doing the right things. And that's really what this whole first section is designed to do, is to highlight the fact that you're probably doing some things that are not the right things. And the fact that you're doing some things that are not the right things are what contribute to the current state of pain that you're experiencing. And everybody's experiencing this to some degree, I would argue, just because this is the default for our society and for our culture. Whenever we have any sort of margin, the tendency is to fill it. If I've got 3 hours on my calendar, I'm going to find something to plug into those 3 hours. And he's saying basically, no, just leave those 3 hours there, or better yet, build a system that systemically produces those free hours, or produces the savings margin, or produces, in the 4 different areas, which we'll get into in the next section. Don't be upset that those things exist. Just the fact that those things exist without an association or an allocation for that stuff, that's not a bad thing. In fact, that is actually a good thing, because we're so used to functioning under overload. And he's got all sorts of different descriptions of overload here, like activity overload, change overload, choice overload, debt overload, expectation overload, fatigue overload. This one was eye-opening to me because he shared a statistic with this one that 54% of people say they are more tired at the end of a vacation than at the beginning. So this just highlights exactly what I was saying. Like, you've got the margin built in, right? You're doing everything technically correct. You've taken a week of vacation. You should feel better at the end of that vacation. But the fact that you don't is a red light that there's some other things that are broken. And so I don't think it's a prescriptive thing. Like, you can just say you've got to build in this amount of buffer, this amount of margin. As soon as you have 3 hours of margin in your week, then you're good. And now you can move on to the next thing. I don't think it's that simple, but it's the alignment of doing the right things and eliminating the wrong things that produces the margin. And you can't just do stuff all the time. You are going to have to take a break, but ultimately you can't formalize that. There's got to be some margin, but it's going to be different for every person as opposed in relation to what they should have in terms of like what their prescription looks like, I guess, for the margin for the different areas.
All right. So what's the prescription for all of this problem we've created, Mike?
The prescription is margin. And as we've alluded to...
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that
It's true. It's true. He defines margin as the space between our load and our limits. Now, the margin course that Sean Blanc put out has a visual for this, which is really powerful. It's like a bar graph, and the top part of it is red, and that shows basically like the top part of the limit, and then at the bottom you've got like a yellow bar, and that's your load, and then in between that is the blue, and that's the margin. And so what you've got from this bar that stretches from the bottom of the page upward is essentially your total capacity. And there's a couple ways that you can achieve margin. You can increase your limit. You can move that top bar up, or you can decrease your load. The problem is that for a lot of us, the load is at the limit, or if not above. And so we've got to be in overdrive all the time and we get burned out. Now, I agree with those two things, but I think probably everybody listening to Bookworm, I know that is a generalization, but I think it is probably 100% true. We would default to, well, I'll just increase my limit.
Yep.
The problem is there's an 80-20 with this, and we've already done this about 100 times. So at some point, you have to decrease your load. And no one wants to do that. No one wants to go back on a commitment that they made or stop doing something that they enjoy on some level. But I've actually had to do this last year and stop doing a couple different things. And I can tell you that Dr. Swenson is right. Once you do that, things are way better.
I really love doing this, but saying no to it makes me even better. Yes.
It's true. So just one example, sharing my failures here. Okay. I used to do screencasts for Screencasts Online. I really loved doing screencasts for Screencasts Online. Don McAllister, JF Brissett, they are amazing to work with, and I have learned so much from working with them. When I stopped working with Agent Efficiency and I needed some additional work, they were the first ones who were like, yeah, you can do more screencasts. You can do the tip videos. Like, I cannot speak highly enough about everybody in that organization. But it also became clear once I started working with Blanc Media that this was something that had to go. And it killed me. I struggled with that for like 4 months, and I knew I needed to talk to Don about it, and I just kept putting it off. Eventually sent him an email, and he's like, I knew this was coming. But I continued to operate under that heavy load for additional months. It caused myself and my family more stress, even though it just that the time had passed. That season was gone. It wasn't the right fit for me anymore. So that's one example. And ultimately, I think everybody has to make those decisions, not just with your work either. I mean, with the different areas, you've got emotional energy, you got physical energy, you've got margin in time, and you've got margin in your finances. You've got to make those choices. And the problem is that I had this revelation when I was thinking about the margin with your finances. When you have margin in your finances, it's easier to save because you're saving towards some big goal, maybe like paying off your house, and you've made some progress already. So when you get additional income, you're just like, yeah, I'm going to contribute that to this thing over here. And you don't feel like you need to buy something. Whereas if you don't have any margin, because all of these areas I think tend to be related, if you don't have any emotional margin, you don't have any financial margin, you're working really hard and you feel like you've earned something. So when the new AirPods come out, you buy them because you deserve it. And that's $250 down the drain. Whereas when you have that financial margin, when you have that emotional margin, you're like, you can see things more clearly and you don't have to just medicate the symptoms, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. I think with my specific case, like the one I struggle with the most likely right now is physical, because I feel like I'm in a pretty good stance financially at the moment. But obviously, we've talked about all of my health issues that come and go. And this is where I have an action item in that, and I guess we'll go through these 4 areas, but I need to get back into, I was doing for a long time a daily yoga practice and had tried to whittle that down. This is, talk about increasing limits instead of increasing margin. Like that's what I was trying to do, in that I was trying to make sure that my morning routine, I could add as many things to it as I could. Now, when I couldn't add all the stuff to it that I wanted to, I debated moving the time back that my girls get up in the morning. It's like, oh, you guys need to sleep a little longer. That'll give me more time in the morning. I legitimately had this conversation with myself. It's like that is a way that I could get more time in the morning. I also thought about getting up earlier, but I'm trying to make sure I don't cut on sleep.
Yep.
Well, then that made me think, well, can I go to bed earlier? It's like, well, then my wife has these 7 things go wrong. Like, okay, so I really can't do that. It's like, oh, well, I suppose I could cut out some of the stuff I do for fun in the morning, like just checking in on some stuff I want to do research on in the mornings. Like, oh, well, but I didn't want to cut that. So
yeah,
go ahead and cut it. Pick up the yoga practice. That's my action item, is I need to be willing to do that. But I have not been good about making sure that, like, even from a time stance, that I've got those buffer times, like those buffer zones in there. I just don't. So, again, this book was super helpful in helping me see that stuff, because I normally wouldn't have noticed it. And sometimes you run across books that do that, where, you know, this exposes something that you've just assumed as a default for a long time. And this is a cultural default answer of just fill all your time with all the stuff.
Yep.
And he just point blank says, no, that's not right. Even to the point where he's a doctor and is choosing to only work 3 days a week. Now, he makes enough, he can do that. But he made the choice to only be in his practice 3 days a week. Like that is awesome and terrifying to me at the same time. But, you know, hey, if it works for him, go for it. I can't do that. I would lose my job if I did that. So I have to come about it in different ways in order to get to that point. But yes, the health thing is the one that I need to, like the physical side of the margin is the one that I need to focus on the most.
Yeah, well, since we're talking about some of the time stuff, this is a really interesting section to me. He shares some research at the beginning of that chapter where at one point people thought that we were headed towards a 2-day work week because we were getting so efficient that we would just get everything done and then we would have all this extra time, which kind of boggles my mind when you read that, because that's obviously not what happened. We just find more stuff to fill it with. And that's kind of his point in that chapter. Is he says, he's got all these axioms, and this is the 6th one. He says, the spontaneous flow of progress is to consume more of our time, not less. And you kind of can't really picture how that's going to work. It just sort of happens if you're not intentional, you're not protecting it. The big thing that stands out to me in this specific section, because he's got a whole bunch of practical things that you can do to restore time margin, everything from turning off the television to pruning your activities, separating time from your technology, getting less done but doing the right things, planning for your free time. But the one that really stands out to me is availability. Be available. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've shared this before, all the way back from the Productivity Project when we first read it by Chris Bailey, where he made a comment about how people are the reason for productivity. And so I'm reading this chapter and I'm like, what does time margin look like? It is being available to help other people and not feel bad about it, not feel like I'm not doing what I need to do because I'm helping this person, and I'm able to devote everything that I have to assisting that person. My wife and I, one of my Gap books was Life in Air, and we've talked about this before. And one of the things that came from reading that was this statement where even if we don't have $1 million, we want to be able to make people feel like $1 million. So to me, that's summarized perfectly in availability. He says usefulness is 9/10 availability. I think that's probably pretty accurate. So the action item for me associated with this is simply a question: am I interruptible? If someone were to call and say, hey, I just need somebody to talk to right now, can I drop everything? Do I have enough time margin to drop everything and go meet them for coffee or for lunch and to spend a couple of hours talking through things? Because I say that that's the stuff that's really important to me, but my actions really dictate and are evidence of what is a priority for me. And I'm not happy when I do a self-examination and I ask myself, like, am I interruptible? Because I think a lot of the time the answer is no. I want to get better at that. And I want to start thinking about systemic ways that I can create that into my schedule.
When I was growing up, I didn't, but my dad had a habit of, if he saw someone on the side of the road, he always stopped and helped them. Because we had the time to do that. And I think about the number of times I've driven past people I see parked on the side of the road, and it always like irks me that I don't stop. But I know that if I do, I'm going to cause a meeting to start late. I'm going to cause an event to start late. Like, I'm going to cause those issues. And I would rather leave the person on the side of the road than do that. So like that bugs me. And if I give myself more time for things like that, I would gladly stop and help more people. I specifically remember when I was in college, I went to Nicaragua on a mission trip. It was a 2-week mission trip. It was basically 2 sub-mission trips within that. The first week we were there, we were on a farm, and the purpose of the farm was to teach local farmers how to create a self-sustaining farm. Great idea, right? Well, the thing they had asked us to do is help a local farmer build a new structure for housing his cattle. Again, simple. What was difficult was that there were a handful of us guys on that team that had built structures like this before. We'd worked with concrete, we'd worked with a bunch of things, and whenever we got to the job site, we were going at it. We know how this works, like, not going to think twice about it. But whenever we were working with the locals who were working on that project, like, we were doing all the work and they were just kind of watching us the whole time, which irked a couple of the other guys. I didn't think much about it because in my mind, I was thinking that this is why I'm here, to do this with them, or for them. Like, that was my point. So it didn't really strike me. But one of the other guys on the team, it really bothered him. So he ended up having a conversation with them, and they couldn't understand why we were working so hard and could not get it through their minds why we were hustling so much. They kept saying, we're trying not to help because we don't work at that pace. So they didn't even know how to jump in because they were so used to taking their time to go through it slowly because they gave themselves so much time.
Yep.
Because what happened, what we eventually found out was that structure did not need to be completely built for about 9 months. And the pace we were on, it was going to be built in about 3 weeks. So they had just planned to work on it a little bit each day. We were there to get it done while we were there in 1 week.
Yeah, exactly. We had this same thing in Costa Rica. We showed up at this orphanage and we were going to rake the yard, and they actually took the rakes away from us at one point. We went and got them back because we weren't done, and then they took them again and hid them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and he does call this out in the book, that there is a point at which third world countries are better than us in the United States, specifically when it comes to time and margin, because they know how to give themselves that buffer, and they do it on a much better scale than we do. And we always feel like we have to get things done as quickly and as efficiently as we possibly can, shorten up the time frame, kick things out quicker. That leads to a more fulfilling life, right? Well,
nope.
No, not exactly. They have it right, in my opinion.
Exactly. And that's the real value for me in reading this book, is just articulating another option where things don't have to be so hectic and so crazy. And again, you got to kind of wrestle with that yourself to define what that looks like for you. But I guess going through it the second time, the thing that I realized was how important this really is. Like, don't put it off. Answer the tough questions, say no to something, and start creating the margin, because you really need it before you realize that you're going to need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the time you realize that you don't have margin, it's already too late.
Now, question for you. So we've talked about physical. I feel like understanding physical margin That's fairly easy, like making sure that you're in good health so that you don't have, an overload of health issues.
Yep.
So that one's fairly easy to understand. Time, that one's pretty obvious. Like, don't butt things up against each other so that you don't have time to find your book whenever you're getting ready to record on it. And finances, live below what you earn. Like, that's easy.
And this is actually, just real quickly, this is the thing where I started to disconnect the first time I read it, because he's talking about how he's only choosing to work 3 days a week, but he also is driving an old pickup truck and he's chopping his own firewood. Right. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that.
Yes. So like those three areas, the physical, the financial, and the time, but the emotional, to me, this is the hard one. Probably the most valuable of the four is in terms of like mental space.
Yep.
But what was your take on this one? Because like the other three, I know I can get my head around, and the emotional one, I know I should get my head around, but I kind of struggled with, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah. The emotional one, he makes the point in the book that this is the most important. And this is also probably the hardest one to measure. You can look at your calendar and you can see how busy you are. You can look at your body and you can say, I got to get to the gym more often, or I got to eat better, or I got to get more sleep. You can look at your bank accounts and you can say, I got to start saving. But when you look at your emotions, at least for me, the response is, whenever you realize that you're making a big deal about something that really isn't a big deal, is like, oh, well, just suck it up, buttercup. Right? It's like, you can change your attitude, you can change your emotions, but the light bulb moment for me was kind of that, on a certain level, you can't. The way that you are feeling about things and the reason that things are such a big deal is because you have a whole bunch of things that have contributed to this lack of emotional margin. He's got a whole bunch of things here which you can do to restore margin in your emotional energy. You can cultivate social supports. You can serve somebody. You can laugh. You can cry. You can rest. He talks about sabbaticals in here. All of that stuff is great. But the question for me as I was going through this was, how do I identify whether I have any emotional margin? Because I always thought that I did. And then as I look back at the beginning of the year, like I said, this has been probably the most difficult year I've ever gone through. I also feel like I'm in a really good spot right now, so I don't want to focus and dwell on the negative, but in sharing my failures, I will share that at the beginning of the year, I didn't know what my work life was going to look like or how I was going to provide for my family. I just knew I was supposed to get faith-based productivity out the door. So I knew that this is the thing I got to work on. And for a long time, that was what I did every single day, from when I got up to when I went to bed. And most days it was fine. Most days I was able to bring it. Most days I was motivated to get this thing done. But there were occasional days where I would wake up, and I look back at it now and I recognize I didn't have any emotional margin. And that's why as soon as I got up, I'm like, I just want to lay here for the next 8 hours. I don't want to do anything today. And I don't deal with that anymore. And that's because I have some emotional margin. And the other kind of light bulb moment for me as it pertains to all this stuff, I mean, obviously you're talking about motivation, and I believe motivation can be manufactured, unlike willpower. So there are things that you can do in the moment to create the motivation to do certain things, but you do have your limits. And I recognize now that I was overloaded a lot of the time, and that brought me really, really close to burnout. But the other thing is that all of these areas of margin, they're interrelated. And so the moment that I started getting more emotional margin was the moment that I started getting more time margin, because I was more effective when I was working. And the moment that that happened, I started to get a little bit more margin in physical energy, and I started to feel better. Financial margin, that's been the tough one for me, because we accrued some credit card debt over the last year, which I vowed a long time ago I will never carry a credit card balance. Well, we did, so that was tough for me to swallow. But we've worked through that, and we now have some financial margin, and like it's completely freeing. And I recognize now that the margin I created in the other areas are kind of what allowed me to get to that point. And then also now that we have some financial margin, that makes it a lot easier to be excited about the work that I'm doing. And it's a positive cycle or a negative cycle. If you don't have any margin, it is definitely a negative cycle, and you do have to do something to stop that cycle and to reverse it. But when you start building this in and you prioritize margin and you're on a positive cycle, it also has an exponential effect as all of these things work together. That's kind of the big takeaway for me. And again, not that I've mastered this or I've arrived, but as I reflected on the last year and I'm thinking about how much things have changed, my word for the year was reset, because I felt like everything that I knew was declared wrong. And I had to relearn everything.
Here we go. Time to start over.
Complete reset. Yeah, exactly. But I do feel that what I have in place now is much more sustainable. It's much more healthy. And so this book kind of brought clarity to that, and it made me really grateful and appreciative for kind of the place I'm in now. But I also want to share, like if you find yourself going through this and Dr. Swenson's reading your mail and you're like, yeah, that's me, I got to change this. Like, don't get frustrated about where you're at, because I kind of feel like my whole life has been changed over the last 12 months. It doesn't take that long. It just takes a little bit of a perspective shift and a prioritization of this margin to make a lot of that pain go away.
Something I want to point out here is that, because you're absolutely right, the emotional energy is one that can fuel the others. So restoring margin in the emotional sector can definitely help in the others. But some of the ways that you can do that, because it sounds great, but until you can really sink your teeth into it, I feel like it's kind of hard to get your head around. But some of the ways, at least that I caught out of it whenever I read this part, was that helping other people, being willing to stop and truly and in reality connect with another person on a deep level, and being willing to stop for other people. Like, those areas are the ones that I see, at least for me, that could be the most helpful in creating this emotional margin. Because you're absolutely right, Mike. Whenever you have the emotional reserves through helping others and through loving on other people, whenever you do that, it does fuel your own motivation. Like, I can think of the times whenever I sit down and I go through either coaching or one-on-one conversations with friends and such. Like, whenever I do that and discuss anything remotely related to either work or the topics that I enjoy, I come out of that ready to go, like, build 6 video courses over a weekend and like, let's go. Like, that's what I come away from that as. And there's a lot to that, because yes, you can derive a lot of motivation from those conversations and from those instances, but they do fuel the others. Like, whenever I'm super excited because I helped someone else in, say the productivity space, like this past week I introduced somebody to the concept of task management. Never heard of it. Like, in my mind, like, who hasn't heard of this? Like, GTD has been around for how long? Who has not heard of this? And yet I run across people all the time. But I introduced a person to task management and explained, like, the concept of writing down the things you got to do and, collecting those as they come up and, going for it. Just explaining that simple concept you would think would be normal, but it was so new to them. And whenever I left that, I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go do a weekly review. Like, I could do this right now. This is exactly what I needed. Thankfully, I did need to do a weekly review, so I cranked it out quickly. Like, that was super motivating for me. So I think you're absolutely right. The emotional energy is like the multiplier behind all the other areas, and it can easily be the most valuable one to start driving towards.
Yeah, and again, they're all interrelated. So in the finances section, he makes a comment on page 146 about how we need to develop a new depreciation of things and a new appreciation of people. So that changes your view on money. And I think it's worth calling out here that just because you have money in your bank account doesn't necessarily mean that you have margin. If you don't change any of the systems, then that margin is going to disappear. You have to build it in to the decisions that you make. He shares some stats in here, which kind of blew my mind. He said that every year Americans spend more eating out than the individual gross national product of 207 countries in the world. Man, so we spend so much money eating out and we feel like we deserve that. We need that, right? But do we really? If we had to figure out a different way to do things, could we figure out a different way to do things? Now, if that's important to you and you're going to use that to build relationships, go for it. But for me, it just kind of shows that we kind of default to the way that things are, and then we don't ever stop to think about them again. He also shares that there was a guy who was running a marketing agency, and he said that when people run out of money, they stop buying, but only for about 6 weeks. At that point, they just start putting it on the credit card.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So that just shows that we medicate with this stuff, and we need to be intentional with it instead. We need to determine the terms of engagement as it pertains to how we spend our all of these things, our finances, our time, the things that we devote our physical and emotional energy to. And I think relationship building is one of the big ones. As I'm going through this, I'm reminded of that. Back to Chris Bailey, people are the reasons for productivity. Relationships are really the reason for living. It's not about what you can make. It's about the people that you can help. And it's easy to lose sight of that. And it's easy for those things to be neglected, especially when you look at your task list and all the different things that you have to get done throughout the day. But really for me, and I don't have a system on how to do this necessarily yet, other than to ask myself that question, am I interruptible? Like, I want to be able to be available when people need it. But the next step would be kind of what you were talking about, where the things that I'm doing, how are those depositing into somebody else? If you can do that every time you talk about task management, then keep talking about task management. It gives you energy and motivation to do it.
Yeah.
It's when you just, okay, I got to write something now, and you don't really think about the person that you're writing it for, or you're not focusing on how you can help somebody, that it becomes rote and meaningless.
Okay, so because I feel like we could keep going a long time on this.
Yeah.
The prognosis section, this might go fast. I could see that. But the prognosis he gets into, so part 1, well, there's part 0, essentially, the marginless living. Part 1 is the problem, pain. Part 2 is the prescription, margin. And the prognosis is health. But he's got 4 different areas here that he talks about in this. And as we talked about earlier, this is when it goes like very much, here's God's view on this. Like that's when he makes this, I don't want to say a shift, but it's very, very prominent once you get here. The first of which is contentment. And how do you go about becoming content with your current situation, no matter what it is? And it's not a topic I really wanted to cover.
Which means we should cover it.
I know. That's the frustrating part. It's like, I don't want to talk about this, but that means I probably should.
Yeah. So contentment he defines as the freedom that comes when prosperity or poverty do not matter. And this is interesting and difficult to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, am I content? Because we always want to have more. And he shares a quote from Immanuel Kant. He says, give a man everything he wants, and at that moment, everything will not be everything. Guilty.
Yep.
But that's kind of what has contributed to where we are today. So we have to ask ourselves, what do I really need? And when everything is going fine, or you can make everything work, it's harder to answer that question. But I've had to do that. My wife and I, this summer, we were thinking about selling our house. We're like, well, do we really need this house? Or can we get by with something that is less expensive? We need a certain amount of room because we have 5 kids. But there was a house we found like half a mile from where we lived that was not nearly as nice, but like half the price. So we seriously contemplated moving. And eventually, as we talked about it and we prayed about it, we decided that no, this is where we're supposed to stay. But just being willing to make those tough choices, that's really, you have to have that in order to start creating any sort of margin. And when you're able to keep things going according to the status quo, you just dismiss this. But contentment is being able to answer this question honestly and saying, these are the things that I need. I've got those things. Okay, yep, I'm good. And that's difficult.
Well, yeah, because the things that I want always continue to show up all the time. Like when the AirPods Pro came out, my first thought was, oh, that'd be really cool. I'm not spending $250 on those. Like that was my next thought. But that doesn't mean I don't want them. And I still think about it from time to time, even to the point where I've debated, like, okay, can I pick up a extra side thing here and there and then be able to buy those? Like that crosses my mind on a regular basis now.
Yep.
And that's not okay. Like how many times have we talked about podcasting gear? And like I run a soundboard. I have a Shure Beta 87A. Like it's a nice microphone. And yet there are others that I would like to upgrade to. And I like, could I upgrade the soundboard? I'd like to have a different, preamp. Like there's all these things that go through your mind. Like there's always another thing you could do. But those things are, for me, the vast majority of listeners aren't going to be able to hear the difference in those things. Like I say this at our church all the time with events. Like I will find things wrong with sound every time the sound system's on. Like I just will. I will always hear those things. But 99.999% of the people in that room have no clue. Like they're not going to be able to tell the difference between, that EQ setting versus a different one. Like they just won't hear that.
Yep.
So like there is a line where you have to say, this is okay. And I'm okay with it being at this level. Even though I think it could be better, it's not worth all the extra in order to get there. And that is not a mindset that I like going to at all.
Yeah, and I think the main area that this plays out for people is in the possessions. So what do you need to have? And progress continues to redefine what we need to have. He uses the example in here of air conditioning. And while I am not willing to live in a house without air conditioning, do I really need it? In Wisconsin, probably not. It's not even on for 9 months out of the year because it's too cold. There's snow on the ground for half of the year. But it's the kind of thing where unless you are to really dig in with this, you just quickly dismiss it of like, well, of course, my house has to have air conditioning. But for a long time, people didn't have air conditioning. They were completely fine. So do you really need it? And again, you can choose the things that you decide you need. But the problem is when we decide we need all of the stuff, all of the things. And that's why I think the practice of saying no to things is really good. It's hard to do initially, but as soon as you start saying no to one thing, then it's easier to do it again. Kind of cheesy example of this. I have wanted for a very long time to get some dress clothes that I don't have to iron because I'm not good at it. And I'm not going to ask my wife to do it. I get up every Sunday morning and I iron my clothes. It takes me 15, 20 minutes. And it's just I hate every moment. But I continue to do that because I have a closet full of clothes that require ironing. And recently I got to the point where it's just like, this is enough. I need to let all of this stuff go. I've tried to clean out that closet so many times and I look at the stuff. This is nice stuff. I can't just give this away. Well, I just gave away 3 trash bags full of clothes that had accumulated over the years that I hadn't worn in forever. I end up wearing the same couple shirts, same couple pairs of pants every single week because they're easy to iron. I'm like, what am I doing?
Yep.
So I bought a couple Ministry of Supply shirts, a couple pairs of pants, and it's amazing. Like I threw this stuff in my suitcase, traveled to Kansas City, took it out. It didn't have a single wrinkle. We shot video for a course that we're working on in that stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is so much better. Why did it take me so long to let go of those things? And there's, I think, a lesson in that where you tend to cling to what you know. And sometimes releasing those things is what enables that to be replaced with something even better. That could apply not just to your physical possessions, that could apply to your work situation. As I reflect on where I was, I kind of see maybe that was the case. I saw where I was and I was comfortable there and I didn't want to even think about rocking the boat, but now I look back at it and I'm like, man, This margin feels so amazing.
Yeah. One of the areas I have another action item on, and this is one that my wife and I have talked about fairly regularly over the last year and a half. I couldn't have connected it to margin, but the concept of a simple life and simplicity. So we have a tendency to find like the best way to do something, or like the way that would take the fewest number of batteries. Can I do something without cables because I'm an analog freak? Like that sort of thing crosses my mind a lot. And I like the process of things. Like, for example, I have a manual coffee grinder. It has a crank on the top, and I crank it, and that's what grinds the coffee. Is that ideal? No. I take about 15 minutes every week to grind coffee for the week, and that's what I do. I like the process. But that is not a simple thing. Like, I could easily buy a powered one that would get the job done in a couple minutes, if that. And that would be way more effective. That would probably be the simpler way to do it. And yet I've chosen the complex way of doing things. So I have a tendency to do this. I don't always select the simple way of life, and I should, I think. So this is something I need to continue to work on. I think I finally need to listen to my wife on this one. I think I've just been shrugging things off. Whoops, because I don't want to. And this is an area I definitely need to work on. So I've got an action item on this one. I just called it Simple Life because I have no idea what that should be. How, like, what do I do with that? I don't know. But I at least need it written down somewhere.
Yeah, I have an action item with this too, in the form of a question, so you can't hold me accountable to it again. How can I simplify my life? There's been value just in asking those questions for me. I don't know. It doesn't fit very well for podcast action items, but the asking myself these questions actually creates a lot of change for me and a lot of clarity in what to do going forward. So even though there's not a clear connection between what actually gets done and the action item itself, this is definitely the way that this works for me. When I ask the right questions, usually I find the right answers. And this is, how can I simplify my life? This is something that I did not get from this the first time, because the first time I read this and I'm like, well, I'm not chopping my own firewood and I'm not driving a beat up pickup truck. So I guess, he can simplify, but I'm not, this guy's just an extremist. I'm not going to listen to him. But I caught more this time as I went through it, and I realized that, well, I don't have to chop my own firewood. I don't have to drive a beat up pickup truck. I do need to ask myself this question, and I do need to figure things out and figure out how I can simplify things. In extreme ownership, there's a whole chapter devoted to simplify. It's called Simple. And I reread that recently. We talked about that in a previous episode, so we won't go through the whole thing. But the thing that stands out to me from that section is that's a leadership book. It's talking about when you're managing people, you need to simplify the vision so that people can execute on it effectively. But this totally has value in how you structure the systems of your own life, because in that section, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin make a comment that the enemy gets a vote. So that means that there are going to be things that are not going to go according to plan. And the more complex something is, when you've got 100 different things that have to go right in order for this project to be completed successfully, and they're all interdependent, then that's probably not going to work. That's going to go off the rails. But if you've only got 3 simple steps that you've got to follow, there's a much higher chance of success. And I realize that a lot of the pain that I have experienced over the last year is self-inflicted because things were so stinking complicated. And it challenges me to, now that I've hit the reset button, how can I reestablish these things so that they're simpler? One example of this is my journaling habit. My journaling habit, I was using this shortcut, and I asked myself all of these questions, and at the beginning of the year when I needed it the most, I wasn't doing it. And so I've gotten back into it, and I've journaled every day now the last couple of months. And the reason that it's worked this time is that I've simplified it. I've eliminated some of those prompts that I've answered, and I've just basically boiled it down to the core elements. when I started doing my meditation habit, which I'm still going with. I started with Headspace because it gave me the option to just do 3 minutes every day. I can find 3 minutes at the beginning of my day every single day. I can't sometimes find 10 minutes, which for something like Calm, that's what it is. The daily Calm is 10 minutes long. And so I find myself just saying, oh, I'm not going to do it today. And then as soon as you say you're not going to do it today, then it's easier to skip it again the next day, and etc. You've broken the chain, you've broken the system. Making things as simple as possible, with the definition of success being simply that this thing got done, not trying to focus on the quantity of the good that's produced from it, has been kind of a big deal for me.
I'm with you. I don't do simple well. I don't. I should, but I don't. So this is, I feel like I could go on and on and on about it. We both probably could. But this is, and I guess maybe this has been in the back of my head for a while. It does play into my OmniFocus setup even right now. Like, I've simplified that down so much that it's really just one list I work from, broken apart into other areas. Like, I've done that. It drives people nuts that I don't use tags. Like, they keep saying, why don't you use flags? Like, well, it's just another tag. Like, I don't want to use that.
Exactly. Yeah, but you have all these features. You can do all these things. Doesn't matter. Yeah. When I add all those things, it's not going to work.
Yep, exactly. And the one feature I want is that doesn't exist is designed to simplify, in that I do my weekly review on a given day, and I let a script I wrote take everything in OmniFocus so that it's reviewed on a certain day. Like, that is a simplification of what it currently does, and it's not there. So even when it doesn't simplify enough, I add on to it. So I've done this digitally, I think, in a number of ways, like trying to cut back on the number of tools I use and trying to use some of these multi-purpose types of setups. And I continue to do that, but I don't really take it outside of that. I don't try to simplify the logistics of what I have going on in life. I don't try to simplify the work that goes into taking care of myself from a health stance. Like, I just don't do those things.
Yeah.
Some of that's that I just haven't been thinking about it in that form, and this has kind of opened my eyes to it. So it's definitely a good thing. I just haven't been aware of it, I don't think. At least not enough to act on it at all.
Exactly. It occurs to me as we're talking through this that maybe we make things more complicated, especially driven people who are high achievers. We want a certain level of complexity because it's associated with the pride that we feel when we get something done. And we got to break that. I got to break that. I'll make it personal. You don't have to break that, listener. Just me. I'm the one who deals with this.
Just Mike.
Yeah. But yeah, I make things way too hard, and I just got to keep it simple, stupid. And that kind of relates to the other chapters in this last section where he talks about balance and rest. I don't have a whole lot that I want to say here. I actually hate the term balance. He does have another book. It's on my bookshelf. It's In Search of Balance is the name of it. It's a yellow book, and I want to read it at some point as a gap book to kind of contrast it with this. But I think balance, kind of, people get the picture of like the work-life balance, and I firmly believe that there is no work-life balance. There's just your life, and you got to manage it well. Now, his point with balance is that you've got all these different areas of your life, and you can't be excellent at work and neglect your family. And I totally agree with that point. But just the term balance, I think a lot of people strive for something that just doesn't exist. And the better term from the 12-week year is intentional imbalance, where for a short period of time, you're going to focus on this thing and you're going to be excellent in this area and you're going to make adjustments. And then after that, you're going to shift focus and do something else. So we don't really need to talk a whole lot more about that section in balance. But I do want to talk about something from this health through rest chapter, because he uses an analogy here of the 4 gears of the healthiest lifestyle. The first gear is park, and that's used for rest and renewal. The second gear is low. That's used for relationships, family, and friends. The third gear is drive, which is our usual gear for work or play. And then the fourth one is overdrive, which is reserved for times that require extra effort. But he makes the point that much of our society never downshifts from overdrive. And as I read that, I'm like, yes, guilty. And I think that this is a great idea. And if all it took, if all that happens from this is that you recognize that there's these different areas, different gears, and you have been working in overdrive and you need to slow down a little bit, that's good enough. But I totally see ways where you could apply this even at a task management level. I am not recommending that anybody specifically do this, but I immediately thought of the OmniFocus or any task system where you have tags and managing your tasks using this as a tag. Is this an overdrive type activity or is this a low energy activity? And to me, this is more useful than just a low energy context, because I've seen people do that sort of thing. Oh, there's all the stuff I can do when I'm dead tired. But I think if all you do is look for things to do when you're dead tired, that's a red flag that you don't have any margin. And I think if you manage this, going back to when we were thinking about doing Scrum inside of OmniFocus and things like that, like if you assign point values to each of these things, and I only have 20 emotional points to spend today, or 20 energy points to spend today, that might be a kind of cool way to manage the things that you have to do.
And if you set that at 20, that means you need to work on getting it to 15.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like that's what I struggle with. Like, because even if you look at my OmniFocus setup right now, the way that I manage all of the stuff I have going on, a lot of it has to do with time. And this is why I have buffer between task blocks on my action item list here, because I've done the opposite in that I've used that estimated duration slot in OmniFocus to try to figure out how much time I think things are going to take. And then I let those accrue into a day, and then I can calculate how much of that I've got set up for the day and whether or not I can get that done. Like I have it set up that way, which is the antithesis to what Richard Swenson would have us do, in that it wants us to try to cram as much into the day instead of giving us a lot of flexibility.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just when you define things in terms of how long they should take, you're setting yourself up for failure because something's going to take longer, and then everything gets thrown off and, I'll estimate better next time. No, you won't. Also, as I'm thinking through this and using these points in OmniFocus as an example, I feel like this is kind of the opposite of Scrum. And the more distance I get from reading Scrum, you suck. Because the whole idea is, here's how many story points you can achieve. And then once you do that, then raise the bar. And that's the exact opposite of what Richard Swenson is saying, is like, when you figure out what you're able to do, back it off a little bit and create that margin, which is way healthier, way more sustainable.
Now, the thing that this last section here, rest, like this one, it's one that I know, and it's not one that is groundbreaking, but after you've been through all of this and him explaining how margin is helpful and what to do about it in these 4 areas, it does strike you a little bit different than normal. Like, because you hear, like, naps are good for you, sleep well enough, give yourself that buffer time. Like, these are not new concepts, but when you put it all together, and he talks about rest and giving yourself the space to rest, it's something I just need to do. Like, I just push and push and push. I have all these time things, and I have flexibility in that. Like, whenever I set up my day, I make sure I don't have more than about 6 hours worth of work to do, or sometimes 5. That's primarily because I know I'm going to have things come up in the day, and I'm giving myself that extra buffer there. So I know that that's going to happen, but I also know that, like, I'm going to have 2 to 3 hours of that in a day, which means I'm still filling up my 8 hours. Like, I'm intentionally doing that. It's not giving me the time to rest between things and reflect on what's happened and all the good things you should do. But I needed this book. I think that's what I'm saying, is I needed this right now.
Awesome. Well, before we get to style and rating, let's talk about our action items. And we've shared these already, but just real quickly, I've got 2. First one is to answer the question, how can I simplify my life? I shared this with my wife, and we're both thinking about this. So if we think of anything specifically by the time we record next, which I'm hoping we do, then I will share those. But even if we don't, the real value of this is getting us to think that way. So when we are experiencing the pain from things that are more complicated than they should be, we go, oh yeah, we should change this.
Right. That's what we should be doing.
Yep. And then the second one I had was the question, am I interruptible? I've kind of already answered this. I don't think I'm interruptible enough, and I want to change that. No specifics yet on how to do that.
Fair enough. I have 3. I need to get back into my daily yoga practice for the health side of things. I'm with you on how am I simplifying my life? What are some ways I can do that? And then I got to stop on this whole time thing. Like, I got to give myself more the margin in the time schedule throughout my day. So maybe when we're done here, I'm going to ask you about this whole 8-week thing. I'm going to see. That's intriguing to me. So
all right.
Those are my 3. Yoga, simple, time.
All right. Style and rating. What'd you think?
It's your book. You tell me.
I go first? Oh, okay.
You do. This 82 episodes. I don't think it's been different on any of them, Mike.
Okay. Well, I've kind of already shared that this isn't the first time I've read this. It impacted me in a much greater way the second time that I read this. And part of that is the season of life that I'm in, and also the reflective, contemplative state I've been in towards the end of the year, thinking about the last year and the things that have happened, the progress that I've made, the goals I have achieved, the things I have done well, but also all of the things that have gone wrong. Looking back at the things that have gone wrong can be a double-edged sword, because you can beat yourself up for all the things that happened, or you can look at it and chart as a progress indicator and say, look how much I've grown. That's kind of the approach I'm trying to take. Reading this book really helped me with that. I actually shared with my mastermind group. I made little charts on a visual representation of what I thought my margin was at the beginning of the year versus where I am right now, just to kind of visually indicate, like, I really feel my situation is totally, totally different. And I know part of that is just simply my perspective. Some of the specifics of things you would look at it and, well, that hasn't really changed that much, but it feels like it's night and day different. And this book really helped me cement why. And my hope is that makes this stuff way stickier. I feel like reading this the first time, I dismissed a lot of stuff, and I hope the listeners don't do that because the pain wasn't sufficient yet. It would be much better for you to understand this stuff and start making some changes before the crap hits the fan than when you get to your breaking point and you're at burnout, and then you have to make changes. So that would be my plea to the listeners. The book itself, in terms of the writing style, I don't really care for Dr. Swenson's writing style, to be honest. I think the book itself is great. The stuff that he shares is life-changing. It's not necessarily one of the most fun things I've ever read. I did read through it pretty quick, though, because the content was just so good. And like I said, it was what I needed to hear right now. But I do want to call that out, because I think if you're not in the right spot to receive this, then you can quickly dismiss it, especially with some of the explicitly Christian language that he uses towards the end of the book. That being said, I do think this is a really important book. It's an idea that really needs to be championed in our society right now, because as he points out, this is not the default. We've got to kind of fight against this. So balancing all of that out, I'm trying to decide whether I want to rate this as a 4.0 or 4.5. I have to go 4.5 simply because of the impact that it has made in my life recently. That being said, though, I recognize this is not going to be for everybody. I shared earlier that somebody asked me about recommending a book, and I had the thought that this wouldn't be the right book to recommend to that person. So this isn't something that I would just recommend that everybody listen to or everybody read, but I do think that at some point in your life, you're going to need this book. Everybody will. And whether that's now or 10 years from now, just keep it in the back of your mind if it's not something you want to tackle. But it is something that you're going to have to wrestle with. It's going to cause you to dig deep. It'll probably be a little bit painful as you as you look at yourself and you consider the different systems that you have and the results that those have produced. Not everybody's going to want to be told that you need to lower your load, but it's one of the most powerful things I think you can do for your positive mental state. And so I think it's a great book. It's not, but the greatness comes not in how it makes you feel or the emotions that it conjures as you read it. Like some of the books that we read, they're super motivational. They just leave you happy. That's kind of the result of You Are Awesome, the last book that we did. I read that and I felt good when I was done. Don't necessarily feel great about margin when you're finished, but you have clarity on, okay, I see I got to change these things. And for me, that's really the reason why we read these books for Bookworm. So it's a good book.
I'm going to drop a link in the chat. And this is to a tweet because I had posted that we were recording today, and Isaac Smith, I think you know who Isaac Smith is.
Yes, I do. Isaac and I went trail running.
Yeah, so I had posted that we were recording Margin today, and Isaac replied to that and said, that book did things to my soul so good. And I have to agree with Isaac because this particular book kind of struck me in a way I was not expecting to be struck. So much so that at one point I had this book sitting on the kitchen table because I was reading before breakfast. My wife saw it and says, I don't normally like the books you're reading, but that one's intriguing. Like that's that was her take on it. And I have to say this one hit me at exactly the right time. At the same time, you're right in that he's not a super easy author to read. I couldn't quite figure out why that was for a while, and I think it's because he's a doctor who really, really, really likes his science and really likes to talk about it, but he feels like he shouldn't, so then he doesn't. But you can tell he wants to. So it's kind of weird in like he kind of tries to get into that, but then doesn't. And it's one of those things that if you are going to do that, go all the way or don't do it at all. Like it's, when you're talking science and such, like it's just that you can't allude to it. It just doesn't work. And he does kind of, I don't want to say drone on, but he does kind of just drag some things out a little bit longer than he should. So there's that piece of it as well. So as far as his style goes, it's okay. It is one that you can read. It's not so bad that you can't go through it. And I don't want to downplay it too much either, though, because it was a quick read for me. Like the content of what he's talking about made me want to go through it. It probably could have been a little bit faster, though. So anyway, all of that said, this struck me at exactly the right time. I really needed this. I feel like this is, especially if if you are a Christian, like this is a must, I would say. But what do you rate this?
Exactly.
Like, okay, this part I really like, that part not so much. And it's the entire book. Like, it's just so odd.
But it also changed my life.
Yeah, it's so it's something like, okay, you illuminated an area that I really needed light shown on, but I don't feel like I could give it a 5 because the book itself wasn't up to that level. Like, that's just so weird. I'm gonna put it at 4.0. Like that, it's just weird to do that. But I don't think it's a 4. Like whenever I go 4.5s, it's like not quite a 5, and I don't feel like this is even quite there. But the content of it is awesome. But yes, I'm gonna quit talking. I'm gonna put it at 4.0.
I completely agree with you, and I may look back at this and say, well, I wish I would have put it at a 4.0 too, because I agree that content-wise, it's not up there with the best books that we've read. But in terms of the impact that it's had in my life, I think it could be a 6.
Yeah, it's so weird.
So trying to balance that all out is difficult, but there we go. That's Margin. Yep. So what's coming up?
The next one is actually, if you go 3 episodes ago, I played a game that made Mike nervous and had
still recovering.
I had a member of the club, a premium member, just flat out pick the book for me. And Awful Otter on the club chose The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
Thank you, Awful Otter.
you eased Mike's anxiety, so it's okay. So yes, we'll cover The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek next time.
All right, and I'm going to pick mine here from the recommendations. So going to the recommendations section, sorting by votes, skipping Sapiens, we've got Indistractable.
All right.
This is one that I wanted to read for a while anyways. I started reading Hooked, and this is by, I don't know how to say this guy's name, Nir Eyal. I started reading Hooked and got angry, so I put it down.
Okay.
Hooked is basically how to build habit-forming products, and this book is kind of the cure for that. So it's much more in line with the types of things that we talk about here on Bookworm. And we've done deep work, digital minimalism. We talk about focus a lot. And I think this might be coming from a different perspective. I think this might give us a little bit different picture of focus. And it looks really interesting. So I'm glad this one is near the top. And that's the one we'll go through after The Infinite Game. Got a get book?
I don't. Life is busy because, no margin. Gotta fix that. Do you have one?
I do. I have Strategy Man versus the Anti-Strategy Squad.
Okay.
And Josh told me that you'd be mad when I brought this one up. This is by Rich Horwath, and it's basically a business comic book. You really have to see this in order for it to make any sense. But it is a comic book format, and it's first chapter is on strategy defined. Chapter 2, mission, visions, and values. Chapter 3, the 3A strategic thinking framework. Sounds a lot like a business book, but it is literally a comic book, and every single page is illustrated. So if you don't like reading the typical business book, but you like the type of stuff that we talk about on Bookworm, and you happen to like comic books, you may really like this one. All right, so that'll do it. If you want to become a premium member, you can do so by clicking the link in the show notes or by tapping on the icon in Overcast. I'll take you straight to the page. And we want to say thank you to all of the premium members who are giving $5 a month to keep Bookworm going. Your support means a ton. There's a couple of perks that come along with being a Bookworm Club premium member. You get to attend the live recordings. We mentioned that a couple times here today where we share things in the chat. There's links to all of the MindNode files that I create for the books that I read. I upload those to the special section in the Bookworm Club, and Joe also does a couple of, you've done a couple gap episodes on other books that you've read that we haven't covered for Bookworm. So if you want to get access to that stuff, you can do so by using the link in the show notes.
Yeah. Let's put margin on the shelf. Next time we'll go through The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and we'll talk to you then.